We shall move on to the next speaker, and that is Mr. Kiriti Rambhatla.
Well, Kiriti Rambhatla was born in India, and she acquired her education in Canada, in Italy, UK, and the USA. With the experience of working in fields like telecommunications, automotive, media, and consumer electronics, he had been associated with brands like Indesit, TV9 and Mercedes in the past, and invented the innovation measurement tool called Strategic Innovation Cube.
And Executive Assistant to Dr. Renee Mauborgne, Advisory Board Member to President Barack Obama at the World Business Forum 2010, and a speaker at the European African Summit at the European Parliament in the year 2013. Now, as the founder of BRICS Forum, he is also hosting a socio-political talk show, Arambham, in the state of Arunachal Pradesh. Ladies and gentlemen, presenting Kiriti Rambhatla.
Thank you. I know it's a terrible position to be in. I'm the only thing that's standing between you guys and lunch, so I'm going to make it quick. Well, I got a bit of bad news and good news. The bad news is I'm going to be talking about economics, politics, history, and a whole bunch of other macroeconomics that you guys might find boring. The good news is you guys don't have an option. You should listen to me. So, for the next billion jobs, well, before I start my topic, I just wanted to tell you guys about an incident that happened on Facebook. On the page for this event, somebody just made a comment that read, "Ha ha ha, ROFL, LMAO, all the best." Now, I just did not understand what that meant, but now that I'm actually standing here and I have a good look at you guys, I do see the funny side. I really do. And one of my friends actually messaged me and he said, "Kiriti, do you really know what a billion means?" And I said, "I do, because I come from a country that has 1 billion people." So, getting into the idea for the creation of the next billion jobs by cracking what I call the BRICS code, we got to look into the philosophy behind this idea that rests on 4 fundamental tenets that I call logic, economic patterns, history, and technology. So we're going to be using all these 4 fundamental topics or tenets or whatever you call these and explain and see how we can create those billion jobs on this planet. Now, before we start off the discussion, I'm going to be relying heavily on a framework that I believe in through my research over the years. And the framework basically states, when you have commodities, basically commodities could be a lot of things, the prices of these commodities stabilize between countries on this planet over a period of time. That facilitates trade between countries. Now, through this trade, you create a lot of jobs, and through time again, countries resort to effective policies, and that leads to stabilization of commodity prices. Now, logically speaking, how can we actually create 1 billion jobs? Am I really nuts, or do I really believe there are 1 billion people looking for 1 billion jobs? You got to ask the fundamental questions of where, when, and how. So I'm going to start off with the world map, and we're going to define geographically what is the scope of this argument. So as you all might know by now, I'm going to be focusing on BRICS nations, a phrase that has been made popular by an analyst at this private bank called Goldman Sachs in the year 2001. So we're going to be looking at Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Collectively, they have about 3 billion people, and what I mean right now, 1 billion is about 33%, but the population is going to be growing, so we're looking at about 28 to 30%. So we're looking at creating employment opportunities to about 30% of this target group. Now, we're going to go back to the commodity price stabilization, basically something that I call the wheat syndrome. If you go back to the year, it's very important in this discussion to define time frames. So you need to understand that we work with time frames. Time frames basically could be from 50 years to 100 years, a century. So what exactly happened in the year 1800s? If you took a bushel of wheat, that was how they measured wheat back in the day in North America. In Chicago, it costed about 85 cents, and the same bushel of wheat costed about $1.85 in London. Now, after 100 years, when we measured the prices of this wheat in the same cities, we found that in Chicago it costed about 98 cents and in London 97. So you see the prices have stabilized in both the cities over a period of 100 years. A lot of people, at least the classical thought of economics, would like to argue that the steam engines and the steamboats and the supply chains and everything became efficient that drove the prices down. But what I'd like to believe, what I call the neoclassical thought, is there was an information chain that was created. People in Chicago knew what was happening in London. People in London had knowledge about what was happening in Chicago. Now, we're going to be looking at something that we call the Industrial Revolution. Some of you might have read about this before. The Industrial Revolution, and again, we're going to be defining a time frame of about 100 years, from 1825 to 1925. And the continents in question here would be Europe and North America. And the two poles of economic activity, as we all know, was the United Kingdom and the United States of America. And something really strange happened in the year 1858, and I'm going to get back to that. What really happened is the population increased between these two continents put together from 200 million to 500 million, and it is believed a lot of jobs have been created during this time. And we can see some of the industries and the job creation pattern from the year 1880 to 1910 between the UK and the USA in various industries like the agriculture, fishing, mining, construction, trade, and what have you. And what is strange here is most of them have reported more than 100% of increase in job creation. So I'm going to go back to that one thing that I mentioned about that strange thing that happened in the year 1858. The first transatlantic undersea submarine optic fiber cable was laid down between North America and Europe. These are submarine cables that connect continents today that pass data, voice, and all these traffics. And after the creation of the first cable in 1858, you have some data from the year 1900. What we noticed is we've got the United States of America receiving more than 50% of the British exports, and of course the UK receiving more than 30% of the exports from the US. And we don't have the exact estimates of what exactly happened before the cable was laid down, but it is believed the rate of exports has been doubled. So there is a strange correlation between the undersea submarine cables and the trade that's happening today. Now, when we look at the snapshots of the undersea submarine cable network of this planet from two different eras, from the 1894, you see there is a huge density of these cables between North America and Europe, suggesting that there is a lot of economic activity between these two continents. Now, it is a logical guess as to what this cable network would look like today in the year 2005. As we all know, US and China are the economic superpowers, and you see the density of cables is extremely strong between the US and the Chinese economy. Now, the point now is if you see the southern hemisphere, there's a little connectivity there. Now we're going to be answering that. Where would the next information chain connect on this planet? Well, the whole point of this topic is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. As we all know, it's as easy as just drawing lines on this world map, but that's approximately 34,000 kilometers of undersea submarine cable to connect these 5 countries. That is an extreme engineering project, and it's happening right now as we talk. It's going to go operational in the year 2015, and it's going to be connecting all these countries to the United States of America. Now, what will that do? We're going to go back to commodities again. Once the cable becomes operational in the year 2015, we have a matrix of the top commodities from the BRICS nations. You take Brazil, you've got coffee, oil, you got motors, aircrafts. You have Russia looking at petroleum. You've got India looking at precious stones. We've got China looking at medical equipment, electrical equipment. We've got South Africa having diamonds and other forms of platinum and precious stones. My point is, what's going to happen in the next few years when the prices of these commodities relatively stabilize in these countries? It's going to lead to a tremendous boost in trade. Now, trade is just not going to happen. It needs some agents that we call transnational corporations between these BRICS nations. If you were to see what are the top 5 companies in terms of market capitalization in the BRICS countries today, they're doing very little work between themselves. So if you were to do some kind of permutations and combinations, you come up with hundreds and thousands of ways in which these companies could actually engage in creating joint ventures to create opportunities, and they need to step in. But for them to step in, something very important needs to happen. That is at the policy level in the governments. So I've been tracking the bilateral summits of these BRICS nations over the past 5 years to come up with a matrix in the areas in which the BRICS nations want to collaborate in the future. And you'd actually be surprised the number of industries that are actually in this matrix. So if you take Brazil and India, they're looking at pharma, science and technology. Brazil and South Africa looking at logistics and warfare. India and China looking at IT, commodities and infrastructure. And then you got China and South Africa looking at minerals and metals. And the list is endless. They're working on a lot of industries. So all these industries are going to report a huge growth percentage in job opportunities in the next 20, 30, 40, or even 50 years. At least that's the economic pattern that we learn from the Industrial Revolution. So the next point is one cable really enough? As we all saw in the undersea submarine cable network map, as the economic activity progresses, you need more cables to support and sustain the data of trade and traffic between the countries. And I'm a firm believer in markets, and monopoly could not exist, so you need more cables to be laid down between these nations. And it's a bit of a chicken egg case, you know. Do you need more cables for more trade to happen, or do you need more trade for the cables to come into place? So how can the next billion jobs be created? If you were to summarize the discussion now, you'd be looking at laying down more BRICS submarine cables, and then you got to set the right BRICS transnational trade policies. And again, trade policies actually trigger the businesses to come up with new policies to generate jobs. So you need the right set of BRICS transnational policies. And one thing that I'd like to mention here are the BRICS summits that are taking place today. You might have heard of the BRICS summits. These are not vanity projects, but these are projects where the governments are coming up to deal with the kind of industries they'd like to collaborate in the future to create jobs. Now, that would boost trade, as we've already seen, and you got to give it time. Most importantly, people ask me, how can we create 1 billion jobs in a year's time? That's not going to happen in a year or two. It would take at least 50 to 100 years. So given the fact that the first BRICS cable would be operational in the year 2015, you got to give it a time frame of maybe 50 years. So by 2065, we could possibly create 1 billion jobs, provided we do the first 3 points correctly. Now, I know there are lots of optimists in the crowd here, and some of you, if you still think 1 billion is too big a number, just remember that China created 200 million jobs in the last 20 years. 200 million jobs in the last 20 years. And it is estimated that India's workforce, and then there's a huge difference between population, your labor force, and your workforce. India's workforce would be 67% of its population in the year 2020. By conservative estimates, that's close to 800 million people. We've already factored in 1 billion. And we haven't still taken Brazil, Russia, and South Africa into consideration. So they're all going to come together. And something really strange that you need to take into consideration here is, during the Industrial Revolution, the then superpower United Kingdom, if you took the growth rates of the economy over a span of 100 years, and if you did an average, they grew at about 1%. They grew about 1%. And today, the Reserve Bank of India is extremely annoyed and frustrated because India is growing at only 5%. So that's 5 times faster than what the UK did in the Industrial Revolution phase. And BRICS, on the other hand, you've got China as well, you got Russia, you got South Africa and Brazil coming together. So I'm positive that the BRICS nations will be the building blocks for creation of the next 1 billion jobs in the next 50 years on this planet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kiriti Rambhatla.